So let's talk a little bit about these roles. This is looking at, the different segments. And we did a quick poll just among our roundtable participants here today on the different categories that are out there. So there's digital experience, it's actually should read orchestration, digital experience composition, content federation platforms, content services platforms, marketing platforms, delivery networks, analytics and insights, experience platforms, right? Terminology and taxonomy management, digital asset management, component content management, headless. These are all varying forms of content, knowledge, information management. All of these at some level share some kind of structural dimension. They all share some kind of tagging dimension. They all deal with customer experience, with user experience at some level, right? They have to interact towards delivering customer experience at some level. And many of these have overlapping capabilities. So I guess my question, Nicole, is as a buyer, what should you do when faced with this kind of mess?
Sure, the easy one, Cruz. Thanks. It is a very valid question because it is not an easy answer. And I think what it comes down to is less what is the label that is placed on these capabilities, and much more so, and this is often the challenge in trying to actually determine what it actually does for you. What are the capabilities? How well do those capabilities match what you defined as your own need internally? And I think that's really what ought to be at the basis for any of these purchasing decisions. The challenge is that sometimes actually determining what those needs are is really difficult. We've talked about the fact that the organizations buying these things are more and more complex. I mean, we're now at the point where large enterprises are trying to do this. They might be trying to do this beyond a single division, for example, which again increases the number of stakeholders and the level of complexity, and not just determining needs, but making a decision. But I think we're all moving toward an environment where we as the vendors are trying to design for those various needs and trying to design for the intersection and coordination and collaboration across those different stakeholders, different users, the different kinds of constituents, if you will, that are all part of these bigger systems. So that means there's going to be, I think, significant period longer where we have some very messy kinds of terminology and product categorizations. And I apologize, it doesn't help if you're trying to buy any of this stuff or trying to make sense of your own needs. The other confounding element, if you will, is that I think it's really misguided only to look at our needs today, because we are in an environment where with all of these channels, we talk about omnichannel. Organizations don't currently operate for the most part in an omnichannel way. We still tend to be structured and organized by channel. And I think personally, that's a big mistake, because we can't be effective in an omnichannel environment if we're still structured to work in a channel by channel kind of mode. So that is something that also needs to factor into that needs assessment and that planning for the future. Because one thing I think we can all agree on, if we're trying only to solve today's needs, we're going to very quickly find ourselves hamstrung in the not too distant future.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I as you were talking, I'm thinking of the way that large enterprises with lots of products handle product management versus brand management. So there's an enterprise-wide brand, and then there's product managers who are managing their product's brand and capabilities and benefits and features, but those are in relation to the enterprise brand. There's the Windows group and then the Office group, but they're all part of Microsoft. And of course, each one of those has a subset, but there's an inheritance approach to unifying that customer experience and set of brands. So this is the same kind of thing that needs to be orchestrated at the enterprise content information knowledge management level.
Yeah, it goes back to what Michael and Larry have been talking about too. It's this balance, I think, between what is centralized, what is federated and pushed out to the edge, if you will. Where are you balancing the need for coordination and consistency with degree of flexibility and scope for operation that might happen at some of these constituency levels?
Yeah, we've got so many terms, we've got so many platforms, we've got so many, and you've been exposed to all of them, probably in a direct strategy role. So what you clean it up for enterprise client?
Well, I was going to say, I think the real tricky thing is part of that chart that we just saw and all of that overlap. There exists tons of that overlap between vendors, and some of that is even by design. Part of composable principles is that you don't need to take what the vendor is giving you, and you can do things in a different way. And even if you're implementing a headless CMS, like, okay, well, I'm getting the content out through an API. What now? Is my application accessing that directly? Am I doing some static site rendering? Am I pushing it to a CDN that's controlled externally? It's like, well, you can do whatever you want. And that's part of the double-edged sword of mock architectures. You can do it in any way that makes sense for your customer experience. The tricky part is you need to then understand organizationally what makes sense for you. And then you also need to understand from a vendor perspective, what they're offering and why. Is that actually serving your needs, or should you be, looking at some of that functionality externally? So it is really difficult. And, I think one of the things that agency partners are getting better at is being much more consultative in that process and understanding where the edge cases are and where the overlaps are and where the gaps are, and filling that expertise. In the past, you'd go to your agency and say, hey, I'm a healthcare provider. And they'd say, hey, we know Sitecore top to finish, or we know Acquia Drupal top to finish, and they would go and implement it. And I think now you're more likely to talk to somebody that says, well, I don't necessarily know each and every vendor, but I know the landscape and what you need to ask and what some of the capabilities are. And it's a much more nuanced perspective. And a lot of agencies are starting to do that. Some aren't, obviously, but I think that's really what's necessary, is that sort of consultative, partner approach. And you either have that externally or you build up that experience in-house if you want to be starting to work in that.
Yeah, that's an invitation for various agencies as well, integrators, SIs, to basically build, maybe build individual capabilities, but take a architecturally agnostic approach towards composability, towards the delivery of these next generation systems with an open mind, so that not everything is a nail. If you've got one Sitecore hammer or you've got one Adobe hammer, right? There's a composable environment, and these technologies can be built and integrated together. And the SI is the wayfinder for that complex ecosystem.
You've just prompted another poll question from me, which is harder to solve, like the enterprise architecture level monolith versus microservices stuff, or the in the trenches level of the getting away from WYSIWYG thinking to independent authoring and presentation. Those are both going to be big behavioral changes that need to happen in any org, I think.
Yeah, on par, I'd say, Larry. Yes.
The last visual goes into this, which is these roles, and this is not at all an exhaustive list. In fact, it's just barely scratching the surface. Content strategist, content architects, content operations manager, content experience manager, content designer, content engineer. Big fans of content engineers at A. Content marketing specialist, content AI specialist, QA. There's all these different roles, and these roles are evolving in the industry